what makes for a conscious rebel? I feel myself that I am a conscious rebel. I never, ever felt like I fit in. I was born in England, but I never felt like I could live up to the expectations, particularly of the British class system. Although I did do that for the first 30 years of my life. I was really living my father's life and his expectations of what was success, what equaled success. And that meant a good job with a good salary and driving a nice car. It was all about status, and it never seemed to be about love. That was not in the equation whatsoever. So in England, I just always felt like it was all about work. It was all about money. It was all about status. And love just didn't even come into the equation. Love, I actually thought that love didn't exist. When I lived in England, I honestly thought that love was something that was made up in the movies. I really did. I remember being on honeymoon and thinking to myself, looking at other people, thinking, like, isn't it supposed to be like the movies? Like, aren't they supposed to be like all fawning over each other and being super romantic? And I just decided, well, that's just not real because I've never seen it, and I've never seen it in my own life. So at the age of 32, I literally decided, really, is this it? Is this what life is all about? And my best friend, who had just been sailing around the world, contacted me and he said, hey, I'm going to go sail around the world. And I just remember saying to him, I think that's a great idea. I'll come with you. And so that's what happened. I actually left England. I left my husband that I'd only been married to for 10 months. I had left my job. I gave back my beautiful Mercedes car. I sold all my clothes. And I told my parents that I was leaving England. And my dad was completely and totally devastated. In fact, the first thing he said to me was, what are you going to do with the Mercedes? Which I just thought, wow, I'm leaving England. I'm leaving my country. And instead of my parents saying, oh, I'm going to really miss you, or please don't leave, or no, it was all about, what are you going to do with the Mercedes? And in fact, I actually remember my dad saying, well, you better get back the crystal glasses that we bought you for your wedding. So I was totally amazed by the reaction I got when I told my parents that I was leaving England. And it was all about external things. None of it came from a place of love, like, I'm going to miss you. Absolutely not, nothing. And even with my husband, that was my first husband, when I left him, all he said was, oh, just go traveling and get it out of your system. Not, oh, I really love you, please stay with me, or we can work this out, what's wrong? No, it was just all about material things. It was all about external things. And so when I decided, that's it, I'm going to go sailing around the world, I literally did a Shirley Valentine, and I left England in a very spectacular way. I just shed off all of my old things, and I flew to South Africa to buy a boat and to go sailing around the world. So I really did do a Shirley Valentine. And so traveling around the world just really helped me to see life in a completely different way. I think the thing that struck me more than anything is that for many countries, particularly poorer countries like Africa, their worlds actually revolved around love. I witnessed so much love in people helping one another. And it's not what I saw in England at all. And so apart from anything else, I think what really is a lasting impression for my experience traveling around the world was that love really was the center of everything in so many people's lives. And even I lived on a desert island for 3 months, and the only people there were fellow sailors. And, you know, the sense of collaboration and loving, and, you know, everybody would help one another. If somebody ran out of garlic and the other person had potatoes, or we would like meet on the beach and we would share our gifts. So some people were good at fishing, and some people were good at climbing coconut trees and getting the coconut, and some people were good at catching the coconut crabs. And together we lived in this harmony where everybody just helped each other. And I'd never seen that ever in England. England was all about, you know, independence and looking after yourself, and you're number one. And the most important thing is, you know, how do you project to the outside world in terms of your status? What do you wear? What car do you drive? What kind of house do you live in? You know, that's the way that I was raised. And so traveling around the world really taught me that people actually loved one another, that love did actually exist. Unfortunately, it still didn't exist for me. I was sailing with my best friend, but he had made it pretty obvious that was not a priority in terms of, you know, love, intimate love, meaning the intimate relationship of love. And so I think that was always something that I was looking for, but I never found it. But what it did do is it helped me look at the world in a completely different way. I reevaluated my values. I reevaluated the way that I looked at things, the way I looked at my relationship with my body, for example. When I was sailing around the world, there was no doctor. You know, I could no longer, you know, pick up the phone if I had some health complaint. I had to learn to listen to my own body, and I had to learn to understand the symptoms. You know, when I had a headache, it was because I was dehydrated. So I actually took back control of my own health. My belief around health completely changed. I understood that our bodies can heal themselves. And, you know, I was physically seeing evidence of that in everything that I was doing as I was sailing around the world. And so traveling really disrupted the way I saw everything, the way I saw life, the way I saw health, the way I saw money. Because, you know, when I was living on a desert island with other sailboats and other sailors, we had everything from the super luxury yacht, where they had everything on their boat. They had a refrigeration, and they even had ice and plentiful supply of water because they had reverse osmosis. Down to, you know, one guy who had sailed from Australia and lived on peanut butter because he couldn't cook, and that's all he could afford. He lived on a tiny little boat. And then all the people in between, you know, people like myself, that we were pretty average, you know, in terms of our age, but we didn't have any of the gadgets on our boat. So we didn't have refrigeration. We didn't have any water purification system. But there was like an equalizing of the class system because we were all in that same situation living on a desert island. And so there wasn't a status based on how big your boat was, for example, or how many gadgets you had on your boat. It was more to do with your beliefs and your values. You know, were you good at catching fish? Or like I was really good at brewing ginger beer. And so you shared amongst yourself all of those things. And so I was seeing life in a very different way to the way I was raised and what I observed, what my beliefs were, what my values were when I lived in England. So, traveling really disrupted my status quo. It disrupted everything in terms of how I saw the world. And really, I guess it disrupted my beliefs, my spirituality. I was suddenly my own person. And that was the first time in my whole life that I had been in that situation, because before that, it was my dad that told me that money was the most important thing, that it was really important to work hard, that it was important to look right, wear the right clothes, drive the right car. I never actually had my own beliefs or my own values. So it was traveling for me and seeing other cultures and seeing the way other people live their lives that actually created my own belief system in what felt good for me and what I observed from the outside world around me. And it's these types of people that I am featuring on this podcast show. They are the sacred disruptors. They're the rebels. They are the people that have been traveling. They are the people that have observed a different way to be with your health. They're the naturopathic doctors, or they're the people that have looked at spirituality in a different way. These are the rebels, and I call them conscious rebels because it's not because they shout loud, but it's because they listen to that voice inside, that wise voice, and they are willing to then share that voice with the world. And so I call them conscious rebels because they're consciously being rebellious in helping us to understand different ways that you can live your life. And, propaganda tells us, that if you have cancer, this is how you treat it. And if you have a collapsed spine, then this is how you treat it. Or if you don't believe in God, then that must mean you believe in the devil. We're taught all of these things in different ways, in different cultures. But when you start to travel and when you start to really look at your own beliefs, that's when you are a conscious rebel, because you are consciously rebellious against the norm, against the status quo, about the things that we have been told to believe as opposed to believing them themselves. So what is it that I want to pass on to you? I guess what I want to really help other people that listen to this podcast, I want to help other people see a different way of living. I want you to witness conscious rebels, sacred disruptors that have come to their knowledge through their own experiences. They have had trauma, which has put them on a journey and taken them through a journey to discover the way out of that trauma, and how has that trauma really affected them in their life. To give you an example, I had a very controlling life from my father, and my father was a person that really, I guess you could say that his voice was the way that he controlled people. And so therefore, I ended up experiencing even more verbal abuse in my relationships because it was a mirror of what I had been raised with. And so, to go through that journey of realizing that, that's not the only way that men behave in a family unit or in a relationship, that there's actually other ways to behave. You only know what you know. And so if you've been raised in a home and that's what you recognize in that male figure, then that's all you know, right? And so in the same regard, when I lost my fiance, it was the first time I had experienced death. And, I had never been shown how to deal with death, and particularly death of somebody very close to you. I remember when my mom lost her mom, my grandma, that, we were told to just leave her alone and, she'll get over it. She'll get over it soon. It was not, grief was not something that you even spoke about in England. It's just grandma's dead and that's it. You don't linger on that. Pull yourself together. They're dead. It's just, that was how I was raised. And so when I lost my fiance, my world was completely turned upside down because I had no idea what it felt like to actually lose somebody that, you truly loved. And that journey took me on an incredible journey, a spiritual journey, where I started to really look at the world in a very, very different way. That life was we were, before that, I felt like I was a human being that was trying to figure out the spiritual thing, like I could never understand why people had to have labels for spirituality or something external that they had to worship, whether it was God or angels or the Virgin Mary or Buddha or all the other external images and names. And I was never able to do that. In all of my spiritual teachings, I always felt like I could not identify with any of those labels. And so what I learned through my grief journey was that my fiance was actually the way that I had to learn about spirituality. And I was told that, effectively he was my earth angel. And when he passed on to the other side, he became my angel. And I suddenly realized that, you could communicate with the other side, and that the other side actually had a whole definition that I had never even experienced or, I guess, understood. And I went through a journey of then suddenly realizing that I am a spiritual being, and that I'm having a human experience. And I'd heard that phrase many, many times. Many times I'd heard people talking about, I am a spiritual being having a human experience. And that suddenly I felt like I was a spiritual being trying to figure out this human experience. And it was only the journey with grief that put me in that place. And whenever I talk to anybody now about spirituality or consciousness, I always feel like unless you've been in that place of truly losing somebody very close to you and then being able to communicate with them on the other side, and then be able to be open to this whole new realm that previously you never knew existed, or if it did exist, it only existed in books or other people's stories. I wish that I had had a podcast like my podcast where people would be talking about these types of topics with authenticity and vulnerability, and talking about what does it really mean to lose somebody? What does it really mean to actually be able to communicate with somebody from the other side? What does it really mean to understand that, we are spiritual beings, that we are living in a different realm, that we are the creators, that we can literally decide our destiny, and I think everybody has heard that our potential is so much greater than we possibly see or know or feel or believe. But you know what that really is that we only have limited human beliefs. And when that little door is opened to the other side, and you can really understand how big that is and what that means and what our potential is, then you can look at the world in a whole different way. And I'm hoping that I can share with you through these vulnerable stories a different way of looking at life, a different way of looking at spirituality, of looking at what does it mean to be a human or a spiritual being. What does it mean to look at your health in a different way? And what does it mean to actually question everything about your body? And what is your body's relationship with your journey? And, you know, that puts you on a whole, a whole new way to think of health. And, you know, those health rebels, they are going to be the ones that I'm really interested to share with you, because, you know, my own journey with my own health really helps me to understand, you know, what it means to be a disruptor. What does it mean to be a disruptor of the way that you look at health? When my back, my scoliosis, 30 years after my operation, my vertebrae collapsed. And this was only like 6 months ago. And it's very easy to go back to that place of just, you know, interfere and to look at this in a very human way and just say, I have collapsed vertebrae. So therefore my vertebrae cannot support my back. So therefore I shouldn't be able to walk or stand or live a normal life. And when I was able to kind of get it out of my own way and listen to other people's stories, listen to the way that other people look at their health and their body and the relationship between the mind, the body, and spirituality, when you start to listen to those stories, it really disrupts the way that you look at everything. And I call it gracefully disrupting, because, you know, there are those that go on political marches and shout and, get loud about being disruptive. And I think really what I want to do with this podcast and to invite you to gracefully disrupt the way that you look at life. And those conscious rebels that I am going to be featuring on the show are going to help you. I'm going to share more of my own personal journey as well, but I am going to help you to look at those conscious rebels as a doorway to look at life in a different way and to gracefully disrupt the way that you look at life in all elements of life. What you believe in and where did those beliefs come from? What's important to you? What are your values? What are your true values? Or are they somebody else's values? Are they somebody else's beliefs? And, you know, that's really where the sacred disruption comes into play, when I'm challenging you to listen to other people's stories, and that those sacred stories, that is your medicine. It's your stories, my stories, our stories. They are medicine for our own journey, and so the stories that become medicine, those are the ones that I'm going to be featuring on this show, so that you can look at life in a different way through the eyes of the conscious rebel. So I think that what I'm really hoping to share through sacred storytelling is that we can really learn by listening to other people and listening to other people's stories. And I'm going to be featuring those stories. I am going to be midwifing the messages from those stories and helping you to shift your paradigm to question everything about your life, to question, why am I living where I'm living? Why am I in the relationships that I am in? Why am I doing this job, spending most of my day working for somebody else? Why am I loving the person I'm loving? Or do I really love that person just because I've been with them for 30 years and had children with them? What about me? What is it that's important to me? So I'm going to be asking you to really look at all of those elements. And of course, I'm hoping that I can inspire you to really step into your own sacred journey, to really be able to tap into who am I, and what is my sacred purpose? What is it? What is my soul calling? Why am I here? And what is my journey? And how can I look at my own personal story as medicine, as a way of figuring out what my soul journey is? And so as a book publisher, that's going to be my 5D evolution of my book publishing journey, to help people look at their story as medicine and as a compass for your true soul calling. And so with the Conversations for Conscious Rebels, I'm going to be gracefully disrupting the way that you look at all elements of your life and inviting you to allow our conscious rebels to influence the way that you look at your own life and your own story as medicine, as a compass for your own true soul's journey and soul's purpose. So I'm very excited to be sharing all of these stories with you. If you know somebody that would really relate to this, or a conscious rebel, a sacred disruptor, then please contact me. I'd love to share their stories. I'd love to interview them. And check back next week when I'm going to be featuring other topics that will gracefully disrupt the way that you look at life. Thanks so much for joining me. See you next episode. Thank you for walking through today's portal. I invite you to subscribe, share, and join me inside the House of Story Medicine for deeper journeys, book mentorship, and soul story retreats in Mexico. Because your voice matters.
I'm Michelle Abraham, founder of the High Vibe Podcast Network, and we're honored to have Julianne's show, Your Story is Your Portal, as part of our network family. For more inspiring shows like this one, visit highvibepodcastnetwork.com. And don't forget to grab your free gifts from our hosts in the gift vault. Stay high vibe and keep sharing your life.